Seeing none, Riverside Police Department radio equipment.
So you're going to see an article in the Landmark, if you haven't already saw an article in the Landmark, and I talked briefly about this with the board about 6 or 8 months ago when Mike Welch and I first met with the police department. There was some concern that portions of the building, the Riverside Police Department was having trouble responding, or their radios working to get out of the building. Their radios work to get to the street, like to a squad car or to another officer or other responder, but in portions, not all the building, but in little pockets of the building, it does not reach their dispatch center at the village of Riverside. So they had Mike Welch and I met with Ben Sells, Chief Weitzel, and Ms. Francis, Jessica Francis, their village manager, to discuss this, and the village was looking for us to possibly contribute or split some of the cost of them related to them putting in some antennas in the building to help their radios work better. President Welch suggested that a couple things occur before we could really take this back to our board. Number one is that we wanted to execute kind of a study or a walkthrough with all the local responders in the area that would respond to an incident at the high school and see if it was isolated to just Riverside's radios or if it was isolated to or if it was across all the police departments. That study did occur, and from the data that we reported, some departments are able to get out and some others were not. Riverside still had issues getting out in some of the pockets, especially down in the lower level. The other thing that President Welch asked the police chief to look into is some alternative funding sources. And so I know the police chief has recently applied to I want to say a Homeland Security grant or something of that, and a federal justice grant. That doesn't close until October, so there'll be some time before that decision can be made. The other suggestion that President Welch had was he asked the police chief if they could talk to the radio company and see if anything could be done with our cell tower, since it's right on campus, if there was a way to put an antenna or a receiver or anything on our cell tower to help serve as a repeater for the police department. From what we got back, that there was not anything that could be done with the cell tower, and the police chief has applied for a grant. We received notification at the beginning of September that the original bill of $60,000 had gone up to now $124,000 because they want to add a couple additional repeaters and also put the firemen's radios on the fix their firemen's radios as well. So we received the information about the 124, and then like a day or two later, Mike Welch and I got a call from Bob Uphughes that they were already discussing this at some of the budget meetings at the village of Riverside. And so Mike and I responded to the newspaper, and you'll see the comments in the newspaper that we still do not have all our data, and we have not received any formal request from the village yet because we still don't know what's going on with the alternative funding sources. We also talked with one of the other local municipalities. In 2017 and 18, they were required under new state law to consolidate dispatch services. And so all of the Brookfield, Riverside, North Riverside, and I think possibly McCook, but I know the three primary first responders for us will all be sharing one consolidated dispatch location out of North Riverside that is planning to go with a fiber optics, like the highest model of radio communication and fiber optics out there. And so we were asking the question, well, will the new dispatch center help alleviate some of these problems before we go and put these repeaters in? And that we have not received an answer on yet. So I talked with Chief Weitzel earlier this week, and he agreed that a lot of this, no decisions can be made until an alternate funding source is made, or whether or not we get approved or denied. But he was working through with his budget committee and with the village budget committee so that they would have something to be budgeted for. And I think that's what raised the attention and comments from some of the village officials of they're disappointed that the school district's not contributing to this. I thought the
Whose equipment is it?
It is the village of North Riverside, or the village of Riverside.
Okay. Just want to be clear.
And so I think President Welch gave some fair responses that we need more data. We're not necessarily saying no, we've worked with them in the past, but before we go down this road, we want to be able to make sure it's an informed decision and it's the right decision. So I wanted to put this out there for discussion so that I think the board is aware we are having these discussions. President Welch and myself are still talking with Chief Whitesell. This has not gone away, but the new number of 124 was just given to us earlier this month, before in September, and it was news to us that the firemen were being added on. And so it would also was made aware that the grant was first closes, I believe, at the end of October. So it's going to be a few months before we even get an answer on the grant.
Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, if I may. Basically, being a part of this board for the last several years, I know that we wanted, or we would want, information in clarity before we could consider paying some kind of dollar figure. And with our razor-tight budget as it is, I didn't want them to come and make a presentation to the board and ask for, at that time it was $30,000, until there were going to be answers to questions that I perceived that this board would ask them had they come and asked us to contribute to this project. So we did ask them, is there any way to tap in the Wi-Fi? Is there any way to tap in the cell tower? Is there any way to do something besides the $60,000 invoice that Kevin and I were presented with? And until recently, we got back that the Wi-Fi wasn't going to help and the cell tower wasn't going to help. And so at that point in time, it did go up to $120-some thousand. And now that there's going to be this new 911 center, I perceived that the board would also have questions before agreeing to pay any amount of money as to what would be the impact of that new technology, so that we weren't putting good money after something that would be shortly outdated. So I did think Dr. Skeek has summarized it fairly well, but that's some of the things and some of the conversations we've had. We've also asked, is other, our high school covers multiple cities of populations of students. Are there other villages or cities out there willing to contribute to this project? And that was all before we learned about the new 911 center. So to me, it's kind of, we still need more information before I would bring it to the board and say, is this something that that we're willing to contribute to? So if anyone else had any other thoughts, they could chime in.
Any questions or comments on this side? Any on this side?
Kevin, this has been on file for many years, gathered.
I would imagine so.
And you don't have a concern that there's a risk to safety, imminent safety? of our
The way I
students?
understand it is the zoo can get out and get to their dispatch center. Kristen was here when they did the walkthrough. Riverside can get out, but they have to call, to another officer on the street or an officer at a different level who could then get to their dispatch center. So the only thing would come in is if they were stuck if a person was in the basement, they wouldn't be able to get out. But this is obviously
Well, they would
something
be
that
able,
they've
they
been
would be
dealing
able to
with.
get out to
They went
somebody
out to
in
the
the street.
absolutely. And there were some departments that were able to get to their dispatch center from the basement. And so the reason we were asking, one of the things I talked about with Tom is waiting until this new dispatch center goes in is because with the new dispatch center and the highest technology, if all 3 or 4 departments that respond to the high school are having trouble, this might be an easier thing to split across 4 or 5 entities, and now it's not a major bill anymore.
Right.
So I just want to make sure we're not spending the money.
So
and it's
I have a
something that could
question
be-
for you. So that conversation you had with Tom, obviously Tom did not bother talking to his village manager or the trustees at the village, because the article that came out in the paper was pretty negative against this board, saying that we were stonewalling, not wanting to put money into this. So
I think,
how do we get Tom to communicate with his village trustees so that they don't come off negative to us? We're more than willing to listen and understand But if they want to spend money now and then 6 months down the road, they're gonna have a totally different system, I don't think that's economically sound for us to not ask the questions.
I think, I did speak with Tom about that. I think some of the comments were made during general discussions during the process. He then reminded some of the trustees and the administration that the grant process is open for a long period of time, and no decisions can be made till that window closes and then grants are reviewed. So he had not reported back to us on whether or not we received alternative funding, because he doesn't know if we're getting alternative funding.
Well, even not having alternative funding, we still have an open question that they're gonna be moving in a year's time or under a year's time to a new 911 center or a new center. Shouldn't we have that understanding of information on whether they're gonna have to change their equipment out, their radios out, whatever they're...
Where Tom and I left off was that once he had all the answers to the information and alternative funding sources, et cetera, he was gonna then come to a board meeting and present. Where I think this went somewhat sideways is that in their budget planning process, they wanted to have it part of their budget in the event they had to pay for something down the line. And so that generated discussions.
Well, it hasn't even come to this board.
He has not.
I mean,
And-
the question hasn't even come to us.
Correct.
We're just
We
chatting.
we have not received
Anyway.
a formal request of, hey, it's 60,000, pay 30. When Mike and I can let Mike speak to this, but from Mike and I attended the meeting, we were told it's roughly about 60. Mike asked to have this extra data done and this extra test done,
So-
and asked these extra questions, and then once that happened, we had not received.
So
like,
clear to the public, we have never been asked by the Village of Riverside a specific dollar amount. What
Correct.
they wanna do, what the plan is, what kind of...
And we had no knowledge up until last week that it was up to 124 and that the fire department was being added. So that was all new information. That was sent, and I forwarded that to Mike right away. And then 2 days later, I think Mr. Uphughes was at the public meeting, so then he started calling around and generated an article. But I think we are still in the investigatory stages of this process.
Any more questions or comments?
If I may,
Yeah.
and I also talked to Mr. Uphughes of the paper and said that, this board is, willing to work with Riverside, and we have been working with Riverside. And I gave him the example that although I don't, and most of our board may not think we really need crossing guards at First Avenue for our high school students, that we actually do pitch in and pay for crossing guards with the Village of Riverside in a cooperative manner. And that we're willing to work with Riverside, listen to Riverside, and talk about this. And I just, everything that Kevin tells you, has told you, I think I agree with that. That's the kind of timeline that went on. And I know the board, and I know the board's going to have these questions, and I tried to anticipate some of those questions and get you those answers before we could actually put it in front of you. I thought that was more of an expedient way to do it than have somebody come in, have 10 or 12 questions that I could see coming, and then have them go back with those questions. I put those questions up front for everyone on the board so that we could do this expediently as possible. Thank you.
And you did. That was
Very
good.
good. All right.